Welcome to the webinar. I'm Jack Hannam and I'm the former president of the British Society of Soil Science, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all to this special webinar which we're doing during COP30 to address global environmental challenges for soils. So we've had a number of different webinars over the last 2 weeks, and the theme for today's one is soils as a pathway to net zero. Before I introduce our exciting array of speakers that we have on the panel today, I'd just like to briefly introduce the British Society of Soil Science. So we're hosts of today's webinar, and we're an established membership organisation and charity, and we're committed to the study of soil in its widest aspects. So we're a membership organisation bringing together those that work in academia, those that have interest in soils in a professional capacity, so those implementing soil science in industry and in business. We also have members that work in governmental organisations, and we also have a growing number of membership of farmers, and also anybody actually that has a keen interest in soils. You're very welcome to join the society. Just a bit of housekeeping, just to make you aware that we've muted your microphone, so you won't be able to speak as an audience member. So the way that you can then interact with our panelists is to ask questions using the questions box. So please just type those in as they come up during the session. And what we'll do is, after all the panelists have introduced some of the work that they're doing, we're going to have a kind of Q&A session right at the end. So we're aiming to run that Q&A session at about 10 to 2 at 1:50. But please feel free to add those questions in, and I'll ask them on your behalf at the end to the panelists. Try and get through as many as we can, so don't be offended if I don't get around to your questions. Sometimes we have lots of questions to do during that. So we'll have around about 20 minutes after the presentations for kind of Q&A. And just to let you know that we'll be recording the session today, and it will be then be available for view on our YouTube channel after the event. If you are a member of any of the organisations on the slide there, so you have BASIS or Enroso, CPD points are available for the webinar, so please feel free to contact the Society to claim back your CPD points. Okay, so that's enough for housekeeping. Let's get on to the exciting, meaty part of the webinar. We have a really exciting global representation of speakers for this webinar today. We are trying to tackle then looking at specific kind of case studies of where people are looking at soils through the lens of net zero, really from on the ground kind of case studies with farmers and organisations working with farmers, or restoration or scientific organisations that are doing sort of key research that can feed into that, right through to the end in terms of what about the consumer. So how can we embed the consumer kind of experiences, some of these things that we're talking about. We're still waiting for a couple of speakers to join us because it's very early in the morning for them, so hopefully they will come in. But we will hear from Professor John Gilliland. He will give an extended talk at the beginning, and then Dafydd Elias will also, from UK CEH, will give some information about land-based approaches for net zero. We've got Rana Farasety from the Indonesian Oil Palm Research Institute in Indonesia. We're hoping that Emma Limor and Natasha Lee will join us from Nirvana Carbon Solutions, and finally we have Peggy from Zero Footprint Asia. So really exciting. We've got a really great representation of different kinds of organisations and activities that they're doing. So really enough about me. Would like to invite our first speaker now to the panel, and this is Professor John Gilliland, and he's a leading UK advisor on sustainable land management. Done an incredible amount of work in the UK and in Northern Ireland. He's a Northern Ireland farmer himself as well, whose farming operation was independently verified as beyond net zero. Well done, John. So hopefully we'll be able to hear a little bit about that journey that he's been on. But he also chairs the ARC Zero Carbon Farming Project and has authored the Northern Ireland Sustainable Land Management Strategy that created a really pioneering sampling of soils in Northern Ireland. And this is a £38 million scheme where they're sampling every field in Northern Ireland for soil health and nutrients. So enough about that. I hope that's given you a bit of a taster. I'm going to hand over to John now to give us an idea about what his journey's been like. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Jack. Can I have my first slide, please? First of all, can I just say thank you to the Society for actually looking at having such a webinar, very relevant topic, and for me actually sums my journey. I've been on this journey for about 30 years, and certainly my interest was the pathway to net zero. I stumbled on soil. I am not a soil expert, but I have learnt about soils by default, because if I want to achieve net zero, I need to put soils at my core. So this is about my practical journey, with, and I refer to a collection of projects I've been involved in. Next slide, please. So my first real journey in the field in this was I had the privilege of building a living lab on a farm in the Republic of Ireland. And our reason for setting up the living lab back in 2014 was to evaluate the pathway to net zero for livestock production. And coming from Ireland, livestock is very much embedded in our agricultural system. And the method that we chose to go on this journey to net zero was to wean ourselves off our addiction to monocultures of perennial ryegrass and as much synthetic nitrogen, and to really go back and put the science around putting herbs and legumes in a multi-species approach and actually graze animals. I was very fortunate that we secured support from the Marie Curie Foundation in Brussels, along with Wageningen University Research, University College Dublin. We appointed 5 PhD students, and over 3 years, we went an extraordinary journey looking at the system-based approach of the journey to net zero, where we reduced nitrogen fertilizer by 65%. We improved the animal live weight gain by 20%, with 300% increase in earthworms, and with 14 times faster water infiltration into the soil. And when we put all of that into a carbon calculator, looking at our emissions, we had a 26% reduction in emissions. And that was before we started to talk about what were the benefits of the soils, and really made me wake up, is this isn't just about a journey of emissions. And if anyone's interested, the 2 references are there for the publications and peer-reviewed publications of some of the PhD students. Next slide, please. So really what I wanted to do, is see, could I leverage that knowledge further? And we secured funding. 7 of us, 7 farmers came together in Northern Ireland, and we said, well, how do we do this? Can we leverage this? And can we take 7 farms on a journey towards net zero? And you can see the 7 of us and the enterprises that we represented. So, you know, a geographically spread and enterprise spread, really to give us an understanding of the trials and tribulations, how you do that. Next slide, please. Our first objective when we went on this is we wanted to create a definition that people were happy with, and that was around design, you know, defining what net zero was for a farm, not for a country, not for the National Infantry, not for Scope 3 declarations, but what does it mean to me as a farm business for the stuff I have a legal responsibility with. For me, defining net zero was where the emissions from my farm equaled the sequestration, adjusted for any fossil fuel CO2 emissions displaced by renewables or any methane emissions reduced by waste management. What it wasn't about, next slide please, what it wasn't about zero emissions. And that really was an eye-opener, and really we wanted to look at the totality of the system that we managed as farmers in the landscape, not only in emissions, but what we were doing in our soils. Next slide please. When we then looked internationally and looked at what the FAO were recommending, and if I go to their 2023 publication, they clearly highlighted what they saw was the pathway. And quite interesting, by 2050, they didn't expect our sector to get to zero, but what they clearly flagged up, that carbon removals, carbon sequestration in our soil was going to play a very big part, and in fact was going to play a bigger part than dietary change in humans. Yet we were in a policy vacuum where we had no policies encouraging people to sequester, remove carbon, and reduce emissions at the same time. Next slide, please. So for us, where did we start? We wanted to learn our numbers. We as farmers knew we had emissions. We also knew we had carbon stocks, and we also knew if we managed those carbon stocks properly, we could actually build the amount of carbon in our soils. We wanted to do it in a way that actually gave us really good data and really educated us where our emissions and carbon stocks were. And with that data, empower behavioral change of us as practitioners, but also to do it in a way that it wasn't single dimension. It wasn't just about net zero or climate. It was about the other public goods as well that we expect land managers and food producers to actually deliver at the same time. Next slide, please. So when you do this, what normally happens when you go into a carbon calculator, carbon calculators, there are many out there, and certainly for us, we use one called AgriCalc, and we got our gross emissions, and that's what most farms are reported on at this stage. And at the moment, most calculators use what we call tier 2 assumptions in their averages or factors for emissions. Next slide, please. But what we absolutely saw was the lack of knowledge about carbon removals and carbon sequestration. Currently, what calculators actually included will only include it to tier 1. And really where we need to go on both emissions and carbon removals is get enough knowledge and data and measurement to take us to tier 3. Next slide, please. And when you do that, in this case, we're comparing, the health warning is we're comparing to, tier 2 factors for emissions against tier 1 factors for sequestration. But what you can clearly see is carbon removals has a role to play on different farms of different enterprise. Next slide, please. And what you'll also find is that there is no two farms the same. Some farms will find this journey a lot easier. Some farms are beyond net zero today, even farms that have livestock on it, something that isn't really talked about. Next slide, please. So our focus then was to try and start to fill the vacuum and the knowledge gap about how do you measure carbon stocks accurately enough so that as farmers change their behavior, you pick up the consequence of the behavioral change and not just the behavioral change itself. And we reached for 2 technologies. One was an aerial technology called LiDAR, where we flew over the landscapes and we did 40 digital scans per square meter. One was then to actually core our soils down to 1 meter deep, and therefore to stratify our soil organic carbon percentage and bulk densities per depth, 0 to 15 centimeters, 15 to 30, 30 to 60, and 60 down to 1 meter as such. And the plan then, once we create the baseline, is to repeat this every 5 years. Keep a note of the management changes that we do on our farms, so that as we make change and we come back and repeat our baselines every 5 years, we can get some understanding why carbon stocks are changing. Some will be positive, some will be negative. At least we'll have a data-driven process on measurement, but also on the behaviors that are being changing on the farm. Next slide, please. And so when we did this on our 7 farms, I think the first thing that astonished us on the 7 farms was the quantum of carbon that actually is already on farm that isn't talked about. On 7 small farms in Northern Ireland, we already have 500,000 tonnes of carbon on our farms. I think the second thing that blew us away is 97% of that carbon is in our soil, not on our trees. And even my own farm there, which probably is one of the most wooded farms in Northern Ireland as a productive farm, 80% of the carbon is still in the tree or still in the soil. And so even though, as people talk about land use change to trees, it is absolutely vital we do that not at the expense of the soils that the trees are planted within. And we really need to focus on soil health under woodlands as well. Next slide, please. And one of the challenges we have had on this journey is, as we repeat this every 5 years and we see change in our stocks, currently neither the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory or Scope 3 have enough sophistication to recognize the consequence of my behavioral changes. And that is something we are pleading with policymakers and with the greenhouse gas protocol, is you need to smarten your reporting systems too. As individual farmers make positive changes on going towards net zero and getting soil health right and building carbon removals, it's really important that their reporting mechanism is fit for purpose to pick up that change. Next slide, please. So when we did this, one of the key things, we are all profit-taking farms, and I make no apology to call ourselves profit-taking farms. Key in this journey are the economics. And this is what you're looking at. This bar chart is a marginal abatement cost curve. This particular one was created by Teagasc in the Republic of Ireland. And it's looking at the mitigation options for me as a farmer. And it's looking at the economics. So anything below the x-axis are what I call win-wins. Anything above the x-axis are what I call win-losers. And it's really interesting. This shows you a collection of different things. But there are two there that really soil how we manage our soils are fundamental. One is liming our soil pH. One is our fertilizer formulation that goes on. And one is around actually looking at bringing legumes back in and herbs back in and looking at this root diversity, the consequence of plant diversity really driving our mitigation. And that's before we start to talk about carbon removals. Next slide, please. There's two bills here. Go on again. Go another slide, please. Sorry about this. And right, next slide, please. So, yeah, thank you. And at the end of the day, what we as farmers said, well, hold on a moment. We don't see any silver bullets out here. But are there behavioral changes that we could do that could deliver multiple public goods simultaneously? And the image I'm showing to you is another product of the LiDAR survey we used. This is a runoff risk map. The reason runoff risk maps are really important is even in dry countries, on the odd time that you have extreme rainfall events, soil, nutrient, pesticide leaves our land and discharges into watercourses. In Northern Ireland, this is a huge problem for us. And so this is one of our farms, Hugh Harbison's. He has 28 fields. This is one of his fields. This is a runoff risk map for his worst field. And the yellow and the red is where he has clear risk as such. And Hugh got this map literally 2 weeks after he'd gone through his carbon calculator and seen his exposure of using synthetic nitrogen for nitrous oxide emissions. And he phoned me one evening and he said, I have made a decision. Next slide, please. And Hugh's decision was actually to switch from a monoculture of perennial ryegrass and to put herbs and legumes in. And particularly the image that you're seeing on the right-hand side is a root of a chicory plant or herb. And those roots can go down to 80 centimeters. The benefit of that is they open up the soil. They break soil compaction. They allow us to have better water infiltration rates. So the initial rainfall where we have nutrient on the surface now goes into the soil. We're getting better water retention. Hugh has switched away completely. He's gone cold turkey. He now uses no synthetic nitrogen on this, so he's reduced his nitrous oxide emissions. He's improved his water quality. He's seen far better earthworm populations. He's getting more carbon deeper. And most importantly, he's making more money. And the key thing for us in this is how do we link this sort of tripartite journey of making money, because farmers need to make money, reducing emissions, building our carbon stocks, and driving our soil health together. Next slide, please. So I really wanted to bring this back. The big debate at the moment there, certainly in the British Isles, is around land use change. I'm very fortunate on my farm. I have 5 different long-term land uses on similar soil: willow coppice, silver pasture, permanent grass, 30-year-old deciduous woodland, and 250-year-old deciduous woodland. Next slide, please. And really what I wanted to do is learn on the job and drill onto that. So with help from a master's student in Wagram University, we carried out our soil texture classification. We brought in agrocarbon. We measured our soil down to 1 meter deep. And first of all, you can see in our soil texture classification, our soils are not very variable, which is very unusual. And if you look over then at our soil organic carbon stocks down to 1 meter, there are 3 that are statistically the same, and there's 1 that there's a clear winner where we far more soil organic carbon. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So really what we wanted to do is get an understanding what is going on, and from that we were able then to look at soil organic carbon, where it fell, where it was laid down, at what depths as such. And the interesting thing is each one of these colors is a land use, and you can particularly see at 30 centimeters, the blue and the purple, the blue being the silver pasture, the purple being the willow coppice, where you're getting a real build of soil organic carbon there, really between what is 15 centimeters to 60 centimeters. You're getting far more carbon laid down. And also highlighting that if you only measure carbon to 30 centimeters, it doesn't matter what land you use, but you're going to miss somewhere between 30 to 40% of your total carbon stocks. Next slide, please. And so what we want to do is again explore a little bit further. It was very clear that we had an interaction between livestock, the feces that livestock defecate, and on our soil biology, on earthworm populations and soil respirations. Anywhere where we had livestock grazing, we had far better soil biology. Now, we didn't go into massive depth, but we wanted to break out from just looking at the soil chemistry and really get some understanding for us at that interaction between animals, trees, feces, soils, and that complexity for us is that certainly we saw there was a very positive interaction. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And sorry, one more slide. So really from that, we've been trying to get more information, because for us, if soil is going to be absolutely at the center of any pathway, and I ask you to go back one slide if I could, Khaled. If soil is going to be at the center of our pathway, we need more really good data to help our soil community, our soil science community, to help also the National Inventory. And so I've been working with AHDB and Quality Meat Scotland, the 2 levy boards in Great Britain, and we're now rolling this out on 170 farms, 36,000 hectares, right across from Land's End to John O'Groats, really trying to build up this data set and give then our soil science community an extraordinary data set at a granularity that's unprecedented on working farms, not just research farms. Last slide, please. So for me, I have been on a personal journey over the last 20 years, but I have to stand by the title of this webinar: Soil as a Pathway to Net Zero. Improving soil health must be at the center of any pathway to net zero if net zero is to be delivered. On my final build there, please. Measuring, reporting, and verifying must have enough accuracy if the consequence of behavioral change is to be picked up, rewarded, and used to drive further positive change. So real need for granularity and accuracy in that measuring, reporting, and verification. Good quality soil measuring, reporting, and verification is in its infancy. It currently is expensive, and it should be primed, in my opinion, publicly, which is what we've achieved in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much, and I hope that lays the scene for our panel session.
That's brilliant. Thanks, John. I mean, I've spoken to you quite a bit about your journey. Really, it's quite incredible. Some of the work you're doing, and also that the data collection that you're doing, you know, on your farms and with the network that you've got that initiated that. And you can see that there's always this question about how can we upscale this? How can we, you know, it's actually, you've demonstrated that from a single farmer, your cluster, through to, you know, the national kind of schemes and that pilot stuff. It's really, really important. I've got a few questions, but I'll wait to the end to pick those up, and other people might want to. But no, thanks, John. It's really, really great to see things actually working on the ground. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker. It's Dafydd Elias, who he works at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology in the UK. He leads the Plant Soil Interactions Group at UKCEH, specialising in soil carbon persistence and greenhouse gas dynamics under changing land uses. So that's interesting to pick up on John's looking at those differences in the different land uses that you were measuring. And he works on cutting edge climate smart practices that are implemented on the ground, such as biochar, enhanced rock weathering and low emission fertilisers. So I'm going to hand over to Dafydd to give us a little flavour of some of the work that he's been doing in that area. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Jack. And thanks, John, for that really great talk. I think that really sets the scene for the webinar. So yes, I'm Dafydd Elias, and yeah, I'm a soil biogeochemist by training, and I lead the Plant Soil Interactions Research Group at UKCEH in Lancaster. And our kind of research covers the kind of fundamental science, looking at how carbon actually persists within soils and what the mechanisms are, all the way through to more applied research, looking at the sustainable management of soils and how we can optimize those to achieve kind of net zero agriculture, as well as kind of land-based greenhouse gas removals strategies, such as using biochar and approaches such as an enhanced rock weathering. I was just going to give you a couple of examples of kind of recent work that we've done within the group in this area. So to set the scene, we know that kind of modern intensive farming practices have reduced soil carbon stocks in agricultural soils, but we can reverse these reductions through changes to land management. And the first case study I'm just going to touch on is kind of a more conventional, simple way that we can change the way that we manage lands to maintain or increase soil carbon stocks in a grassland context. So this was some work that we did with Arla Foods, looking at grass lays in particular, and these require reseeding and rejuvenating on short time scales between 2 to 5 years. And this results in soil disturbance through ploughing and significant soil organic carbon losses. So we did a piece of work looking at the relationship between the age of these grass lays and the carbon stocks in place to assess whether there was benefit to extending these intervals between these reseeding events. And what we found was that these older grasslands did indeed store more carbon than younger grasslands, but actually that the rate of accumulation really tailed off dramatically after the first few years. So we saw big increases in the first 3 years, followed by much, much slower increases beyond. And we also found that the kind of the context was important. So the soil texture had a dominant control on soil carbon stocks, and how important this kind of age context was. So we found the greatest potential in fine textured grassland soils, but also particularly in soils below 15 centimeters depth, which were relatively undersaturated and had the ability to store much more carbon. And this really links to what John was saying in his talk about bringing those herbs and legumes and deeper rooting varieties back into the sward mix to deliver that carbon to depth where it can be stabilized in soils. But this work did demonstrate that there is a limit to how much carbon mineral soils can store, because eventually they reach a state of equilibrium where the amount of carbon going in matches that leaving the system through decomposition. But we can get around that natural constraint on how much carbon an individual soil can hold by amending these soils with stable forms of carbon, such as biochar. And so this is a kind of key focus of our research within the group at the moment. But for those that may not be familiar, biochar is a carbon-rich charcoal-like product, and it's produced by heating organic matter in a low oxygen environment. And the resulting product is extremely carbon-rich, and it's very stable, such that the majority of the carbon held within this structure is stable when added to soils over time periods of hundreds to thousands of years. So this can be classified as a net carbon removal. And aside from the carbon sequestration aspect, it's got a number of other co-benefits when we apply to soils, including improving soil water retention, retention of nutrients, amelioration of soil acidity, and crucially as well, suppression of nitrous oxide emissions. So nitrous oxide is a hugely potent greenhouse gas, and agriculture is the #1 human cause of N2O emissions. And in research that we've done in arable systems, we found that at moderate application rates, we find a reduction of around 30% in N2O emissions when applied to kind of an arable cereal crop in the UK. But we do need to carefully consider where the feedstocks come from to produce this biochar. And maybe the best approach here is to actually integrate biochar production into a form of circular crop residue management. And so another example of how this could really work well is in the context of oil palm systems in Southeast Asia. So our group has had a presence in Southeast Asia for several years now, working on the ground with smallholder farmers in collaboration with NGOs. So we've been working closely with an NGO called Wild Asia, and they're a not-for-profit social enterprise, and they assist smallholder farmers to achieve certification for their product and improve their agronomic practices. And we're looking at the moment at using biochar and compost produced from the high volume of agricultural residues and organic waste that's produced during the oil palm milling process, and actually returning these back to the plantations which they came from. And we're looking at whether this can improve soil carbon stocks, but also assist with nutrient retention and reduced greenhouse gas emissions in these systems. So this is work that's ongoing at the moment. So with that, I think I'll leave it there. Hopefully we'll get some questions on the back of that, and I'll now pass over to Jack to introduce the next panel member.
Great, that's great, Dafydd. Really interesting. I'm sure there's lots of things you could have selected of the sort of case studies you're doing, but it's nice to link back to some of that discussion with John around the age of these sorts of herbal lays and things, and actually looking beyond just the top, scratching beneath the surface of the top 15 or 30 centimeters, and actually looking then, at the whole sort of soil profile in terms of its potential to store more carbon. So really interesting, as well as the biochar stuff as well. There's kind of win-win situations that sort of John was talking about, potentially then reducing N2O emissions as well. It's actually thinking about the whole system rather than just one sort of component. So that's really good. I'm sure we'll have lots of interesting questions to come in. Just as there's been a couple of questions so far, is that apart from John has gave a presentation, but most of the rest of the speakers are just giving an overview of the sort of work they're doing. So they are not doing a presentation with slides and things. So listen intently, make some notes, and we can pick up on some of the stuff that was discussed in the Q&A later. That's great. Thanks, Dafydd. I'd like to introduce our next panelist, is Rana Farasety, and she works for the Indonesian. So nice segue from Dafydd's last project there. from. So she's working for the Indonesian Oil Palm Research Institute. So thinking about a completely different system here to the UK, which we've been talking about in the last couple of talks. But she's a soil and agronomy researcher focused on tropical plantation systems. She studies nutrient cycling, indigenous knowledge, and site-specific soil management. And her work advances then the sustainable intensification and improved soil function for smallholders in particular in these oil palm landscapes. So really interesting to hear what you've got to say, Rana. So over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you to the British Society of Soil Science for the opportunity to be part of this discussion and for creating space to share perspectives from the Global South agricultural settings. And thank you to everyone for joining today. It's really nice to be here with all of you. I'm a soil science and agronomy researcher, as mentioned before, from the Indonesian Oil Palm Research Institute. And it's been interesting to listen to Dafydd's explanation before about how his works in oil palm. And it also resonates with my recent work where I focus on soil fertility, soil health, nutrient cycling, and sustainable yield intensification, especially in the tropical plantation landscapes, including the work that also related to the smallholder production systems. My recent works, it also includes the yield gap analysis that we've been doing for the Indonesian oil palm plantations, both the smallholders and also the large plantation. And we found that based on our yield gap analysis on independent smallholders, even the yield gap is that huge, nearly reach 50% of the attainable yield, and their actual yield, which is has been the strong concern and drive more research. And based on our recent finding on the yield gap analysis, we've been building a digital decision support platform called Oil Palm Assistant, or OPA, which you all can access at opa.co.id. So basically, our digital platform works as the farmer's diary to record the yield and also provides the site-specific agronomic and nutrient management suggestions and serve as a knowledge hub to help close the information gap for the farmers, especially because right now we've been seeing that our farmers, especially the oil palm plantation farmers in Indonesia, we face a serious knowledge gap and also financial constraints. So I think it also align with what Dafydd mentioned before. So in order to have a more sustainable management, all of the farmers still have these obstacles, and I think we need to all address this in order, if we want the soil can be one of the pathways to the net zero, not only in large plantations but also in smallholders. And in the application that we've been built, we also developed recently a generative AI chatbot built on our research to make expert guidance for farmers and practitioners. So it makes the farmers can know what's going on their field and also give them best management practices suggestions. And in addition to that, we've also have done some research in intercropping and crop diversification. To give you context, the oil palm grown for 25 years, but during the immature stage, which is in the first 3 or 4 years, we cannot harvest the fruits yet. So we need to think about the nature-based solution to give farmers more income and also still promoting the soil health. So that's why we've been promoting the intercropping systems, and we found that on our recent research, when we compare the intercropping of oil palm and maize, sorghum, cassava, and also soybean versus the common cover crop that we've been putting in oil palms such as the Mucuna bractera or the legume cover crop, we found that the soil quality is basically higher in the intercropping systems. We found more microbes populations and also increased soil organic carbon, which is interesting. Because we just have been doing the intercropping for 1 year, and we've seen that differences in the oil palm settings. In addition to that, in addition to my research role, I also contribute as a young scientist with the World Food Forum Indonesian chapter. So we work on youth engagement, climate smart agriculture, and science communication. And we've been doing Indonesian Food Academy with hundreds youth in Indonesia that have strong interest in agriculture and sustainability. So overall, in the context of net zero, tools like OPA can support farmers to optimize their management and also reduce the nutrient losses and adopt more best management practices, and at the end can make climate smart choices as they're part of daily farm decisions. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion on soil as a pathway to net zero. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Rana. That's really interesting, actually, to make some sort of parallels between some of the other talks as well. So just picking up on it's now on the slide, the intercropping, and the benefits of that. And John talked about silvopasture and some of the impacts on the carbon. So even in these very different systems, we're seeing how that system is reacting to those sorts of different management. Really, I'm really intrigued to know about what the appetite is for interacting with the chatbot, but maybe I'll ask you that question at the end. But yeah, really good example again of using data and actually creating like a decision support tool from that data to provide knowledge straight to farmers. So that's really good. So I'm sure we'll pick up on all these sorts of things and unpick some of those. That's great. Thanks, Rana. Unfortunately, some of our other speakers couldn't make it, but we have our final speaker for the panel. So we've talked a lot about sort of the one end of the system, which is very much obviously focused on soils and food production, but how can we start to integrate the end of that sort of food chain into this sort of discussion? So I'm delighted to welcome Peggy Chan, and she works for Zero Footprint Asia in Malaysia, and she leads the mission to transform Asia's food sector into a driver of climate action. And they've funded over 30 regenerative agriculture projects, and she's recognised globally for her sustainability leadership, and she previously founded Hong Kong's first carbon neutral restaurant. So over to you, Peggy. Really excited to hear what you've got to say about the other end of the food chain. So over to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks for the intro, Jack, and really great to hear from all the panelists and also Professor John. So thank you so much to British Society of Soil Science for inviting me as well. I'm dialing in from Penang, Malaysia, but I'm actually from Hong Kong. And so for the past 15 years, I've been in Hong Kong setting up my own little social enterprise. So maybe just a bit about Zero Footprint and then how I myself as a chef restaurateur got into this space. So Zero Footprint is a nonprofit that was started in California in 2015. The initial goal of Zero Footprint was to get restaurants to do an LCA to quantify their carbon emissions as an operation. And so whatever they would emit, they could offset it through regenerative farming projects in California. Now, this was very, very early for what we're talking about now. So there weren't a lot of science around it. Everyone was still kind of learning. We were the first restaurant in Asia to join Zero Footprint as a restaurant, and we pledged our funds that came through from the diners towards projects in California. And so after I closed the restaurant in 2019, luckily right before COVID, all these countries were pledging net zero, and also the documentary Kiss the Ground. I don't know if everyone has watched it yet, but it's an amazing documentary that talked about soil health and how us as consumers can actually participate in regenerative farming. And so that really inspired me, and I got to talking to Anthony, who is one of the co-founders of Foodprint, to bring it to Asia. And so I licensed Foodprint to Hong Kong to start, working with some of the smallholder farmers that we had been working with, sourcing directly in Hong Kong for almost a decade. So basically, what we do is we host a program, a 1% opt-out program, where diners donate an additional 1% of their bill to our Restore Fund via restaurants and other food businesses. And this fund, crowdfunded, aggregated, becomes a grant that allows farmers to access in order to purchase materials, technical support for all the MRVs that Professor was talking about earlier. All of the monitoring, the reporting had to be done in order to successfully transition their farms for the first year. And now we've expanded to projects across Southeast Asia that covers for 18 months to 2 years as well. And as a small organization to date, collectively with America, we have united more than over 550 restaurants and food businesses to join on the pledge, and also contribute in various other ways, creative ways. And we've directed over $9 million US dollars towards 630 plus regenerative farming projects across the states as well as Southeast Asia. And these projects are expected to sequester over 250,000 tons of CO2. So we've also been recognized this past year by the Fast Company as one of the most innovative companies in agriculture for 2025. We are a nonprofit, just letting everyone know as well. And as I mentioned earlier, having been an advocate for better sourcing and changing consumer diets in my restaurant for over a decade, I realized that through a series of trial and error, why changing consumers' diets or helping consumers change their diets is actually really, really hard to achieve. And getting our peers in the industry to purchase better from better farms or organics, regenerative farms is so difficult. But so for most of us in the industry, we focus a lot on the downstream solutions such as plastic waste and eliminating plastic waste on the food waste end of the solution. But when I did the LCA and understood more about agriculture and the food value chain, most emissions come from land use. So up to 80%, around 70% of our restaurants' carbon footprint actually comes from from upstream. So anything to do with land use, feed, farming practices, as you all would already know. But in our industry and for consumers, most of us do not know this. So therefore, why are we focusing on farming, changing farming as a solution, right? And so before ingredients even hit our kitchens, most of the emissions occur at the farm stage and not the downstream emissions that we should be focusing on. And secondly, farmers actually earn the least from the food dollar. So at the moment, for every dollar that the entire food value chain earns, only a few cents actually goes to the farmers. And this actually barely allows them to cover their costs, let alone taking risks and improving their practices. So we as restaurateurs and the food value chain consumers have to really think of, well, how can I conserve, protect, regenerate the next 100 acres, the next 1,000 acres of land? And so this is one of the reasons why our organization focuses on changing farming as a solution. And thirdly, individual action isn't really enough, and we have to accelerate the pace of change quickly. And as a restaurant serving maybe 150, 200 guests a day, we can choose to buy better and support better farmers, but that alone is not enough to shift the system. And so we need to really work collectively across the food chain, teaming up getting diners, restaurants teaming up with farmers to change how farming is actually done on the ground. So the slides basically show some of the images from some of the farm projects that we've done recently and in the last year and a half. On the top left are some ducks, and you would think, you know, it's natural to have ducks on rice paddies. This is a project actually in Bali, Indonesia, with Asan Karaway. And Dr. Uma was the one who led this it wasn't research, it was a project. She had done 10 years of research on complex rice systems before already. And integrating ducks into the rice paddies, as well as the way that they had planted the spacing between the rice plants, as well as building in legume plants across as border plants, all help to reduce pests and diseases, sequester carbon, as well as improve income for the farmers. It allowed the farmers to have various ways of generating income. And after 2 years and 4 cycles, it's estimated that the farmers have a 31% increase in profit just by integrating all of these practices. And on the far right is a nutrient ferment system, irrigation system, where in Hong Kong, our farms are quite small. It's mostly under 2 acres. But there's not a lot of farmers managing the land usually. It's either 1 or 2. And so in order for them to effectively and productively manage their land in a regenerative way, we could help. Some funds can actually go and help them first train them on nutrient management, and then also build the system for them to be able to continuously and productively produce crops using nutrient management compost systems. On the bottom are some more images of capacity building with, on the left-hand side, bottom left, is the indigenous tribe in Mindanao, Philippines, that we're working with on integrating coffee into their agroforestry project. And then on the far right, again, I think it's some of the measuring teams, the teams that are agronomists going in to work with the farmers in Bali on measuring their rice paddies on. So that's a general uncovering of the organization. I'd be very happy to answer any questions later as well. Thanks for letting me have this time.
No, and thanks very much for your time, Peggy. That's really interesting kind of business model. And that was always going to be my question about, you know, so you have this sort of pump prime, what happens afterwards, and it's very clear that, you know, you've created a kind of mechanism where farmers can actually make profit either directly out of the change in practice, so that, you know, over 30% increase, I think, in profit is really, you know, obviously some very useful information to feed back to the farmers. That, yeah, really interesting way of doing that. I don't think I've heard of any in these sorts of initiatives in the UK actually, you know, kind of asking for that donation, if you like, you know, as you're paying for your meal. It's actually quite an interesting business model there. So fascinating. Thank you. We've heard from all of our speakers now, so I've opened. Please do. We've got a couple of questions coming in, but please do type some more in. You can either direct them specifically at a particular speaker, or if you're interested in more sort of a general discussion point, then want to pick the brains of all the panelists for that, then please feel free to do that. But we do have a couple of questions that have come in already. And then also, if any of the panelists have got questions for each other, it's also another interesting dynamic as well. We can do that. So, but they're actually mainly directed at Dafydd. Obviously, it sparks some interest talking about biochar. And you mentioned the use of biochar from the compost from the oil palm, which can help reduce the sort of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a question about, did you use any other biochar sources, and if you did, what did you use?
So in the context of the oil palm work, we used biochar, which was produced from mill waste residues, so palm kernels, and then we also used a compost, which was empty fruit bunch derived compost material. because we really wanted to kind of look at this circular residue management approach. So trying to use the kind of resources that are available within these systems. I mean, in a kind of temperate context, we've used biochar from a range of different feedstocks, but typically ones that are currently commercially available are produced from wood residues, so sawmill residues, wood chips, and woody biochar tends to be more stable than biochar that's produced from food waste, for example, or more nutrient-rich feedstocks such as manures. Yeah, so I mean, I think the feedstock is important, and I think you've got to consider the local context of the resources that are available, as well as the kind of desired properties of the biochar that you actually want in the end product.
There is another question on you, biochar, but I am going to just bring in Rana if she has wanted to follow up on any of that. I don't know whether have any projects that have integrated biochar into those oil palm systems or not, if you have any comments on following that up and the sorts of experiences you have in the areas that you've been working in.
Yeah, regarding the use of biochar, I think it's kind of like a hype right now in oil palm industry. So even like some of the large plantations try to make the biochar on their own. So they have like their own biochar factory kind of thing, where they have the empty fruit bunch or the byproducts there. Some of the empty fruit bunch they directly apply to the field as a mulch and as the addition of organic matter, but in other part they also make the biochar out of it, and sometimes they combine with the mesocarb and also the ingredients that Dafydd have mentioned before, and they try especially on the acidic soil and also in the sandy soil, because like in Indonesia the oil palm grown in a diverse type of soil, from the acidic soil to the sandy soil, the mineral soil. So most of it are marginal soils, right? So they try to fix the soil quality, basically improving the soil quality, and they try to put the biochar and the combination of it with the fertilizers also. So yeah, it's been a wide use practice lately.
Some a bandwagon potentially people. So there is a few questions around biochar, so I'll ask those because they're coming from the audience, and then maybe we can think about some of the other questions. So again, you kind of both touched on this a bit, but please come in, and also anyone else with experience about the sorts of challenges that exist in actually scaling up biochar production. So again, you've talked a little bit about that circularity, using things on the farm. Do you have any experience of those, or some examples of those sorts of challenges?
I mean, I'll touch upon a direct example of the challenge to scale this, because we actually tried to produce this biochar locally within the smallholder context, so using kind of basic technology, flame curtain kilns, very cheap to make this equipment. And if you've got the resource on farm, why take it to the mill and then have to take it back? So we thought, let's try and do this all kind of smallholder led, but actually it's the practicalities of doing that at the scale required quickly became evident, and especially the drying of the material. So if it's not properly dried, then it doesn't burn at high enough temperatures and you don't get the desired product at the end. And so we just found that was not feasible. And so in the end, we used an industrial source of biochar that does this at a much larger scale, where they can kind of more tightly control the process conditions. But I think the key scale challenge with biochar is, of course, the availability of the feedstock. And there is a wide range of feedstocks that could be used, but there are competing demands as well. So it's about finding the best use for each of these different kind of organic waste streams. And some of those may be biochar, but some of those may be better directed into kind of other sectors of the economy.
Yeah.
Jack, can I come in on David's
Yeah,
last
please do.
comment? Because, you know, for me, I mean, I actually used to produce biochar and I stopped. It's quite a difficult thing to do actually and do it well. I did it from wood. My difficulty is actually getting wood waste now is really difficult. There is an absolute competing for wood waste. I look at within British Isles where our biggest waste happens to be the solids in a cattle slurry. And you know, the person who can take the solids from cattle slurry and turn it into a biochar will make a fortune if they can do that right, because we have any amount of cattle slurry, and it'll be putting it into a form that is conducive within the soil. Now, that's not to say that actually animal manures used right are very good directly onto soil, as long as the ammonia emissions are lower. Because what I don't want to lose in the debate, and my concern about biochar, it's a little bit of a silver bullet. You know, the great thing about animal manures is they're also an inoculant for the microbiome in the soil. And if we really want to drive the soil microbiome, the soil health, and therefore ultimately soil resilience, carbon, water resilience, we really do need to look at the microbiology in the soil, and we need to look at how we inoculate that. And so I love the science around it. I'm just trying to wear my practitioner's hat and say, in a whole systems base, there are other things I also want from particularly my manures, is I absolutely want them to be a catalyst for the health of the soil, to get the microbiome really healthy, active in my soil as such. So that's the tightrope you walk with some of these new ideas vis-a-vis actually some of the waste streams that you put into biochar may actually be better being put directly onto the soil, because they bring other benefits as well.
Yeah, that's important, thinking of those, you know, win-wins or other trade-offs. So definitely. Does anyone else want to come in?
I mean, I could just come back to John on that point about the kind of cattle slurry and manures, because I think he's absolutely right. We've kind of done a small piece of work around using small amounts or low doses of biochar actually mixed in with slurries and manures, so not actually producing biochar from the manures or the slurry, but mixing it in to improve the kind of nutrient retention profile of that material. So you get a small amount of kind of soil carbon benefit directly from adding biochar to soils, but it also interacts with the nutrients and the microbiology within those kind of manure and slurry matrices. And that's something that, you know, we've seen quite positive initial results from.
I mean, Jack, I mean, the key thing in what David's just said is actually complex solutions actually sometimes give you your best solutions.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the difficulties we have in this journey is regulators and measurers don't understand complexity. Okay. And it is fascinating. One of the areas, and you called it out yourself in listening to some of our presentations about the role of diversity of plants, the introduction of tree species into the food producing landscape, is everything I'm seeing. And I've had the privilege of being to Indonesia. I've been the privilege to be in South America. I think we're seeing this in multiple geographic locations. It's just not something that we have plucked out of the sky. It is continuously being repeated as such. And my concern where we are today, and particularly if I bring it back to the United Kingdom, we have this extraordinary debate going on about land sharing and land sparing. And I'm really worried we're losing the debate, because I think land sharing with these complex solutions actually will deliver the multiple benefits. But because they're complex by nature, they're really hard to communicate. They're hard to measure, they're hard to regulate. And so people just say, well, just go to land sharing or land sparing, sorry. And and so I think one of the biggest challenges we have in looking at soil and soil's role in the journey to net zero is how we champion complexity, but do it in a way that we can deliver soundbite messages that actually our politicians and our regulators actually understand that complexity is good. Complexity really drives soil. Soil by nature is complex. It has so many different functions that we're asking it to do simultaneously. And I just think we're missing something in there.
Yeah, there's a bit of flex needed, isn't there, in that kind of policy landscape where, you know, it's very difficult. You know, you can apply quite broad brush things, or, you know, we've seen that there are similarities in very different systems that we've been discussing today, I guess. And it's like, you know, there are some simple, let's say, simplified rules that you could apply as a policymaker to do X, Y, and Z. But we know actually when these then drill down into those systems, it is more complicated, and those more tailored approaches are really kind of needed. And that goes back to, I guess, that question about that, you know, everyone here has talked a lot about data or sharing of information and those sorts of things. So I want to maybe just sort of pick up on that a bit more, because there's some really interesting work, including Peggy as well. I think I might start with Peggy first. The rest of it is very much based on sort of, you know, collecting soil data. But I think it's really interesting. I guess my question to you is sort of around, you know, how do you're encouraging people to make this sort of investment, if you like, and how is that information then brought back to the customer? So what you know, what sorts of information or communication or data are you using, I guess, in that context? So it'd be really interesting, and then I'll kind of open it up to the rest of you to
Yeah, previous panelists mentioned but how do we ensure that while we're doing this, we're also bringing on board governments and businesses and corporations to actually fund the transition, because otherwise who is going to pay for this transition, right? And so it's everything that you guys do in general. I might be too naive to understand what kind of data would be required, but the general, of course, the water holding capacity, SOC content. We're also looking at economic variations as well, right? So reduction in costs, like input costs, reduction in labor costs for the farmers. We're looking at also, of course, brick levels, nutrient density, if we have the budget to cover certain nutrients. So all of these we do report on an annual basis, but also on a quarterly basis for each selected project. And so organic SOC obviously cannot be, the changes won't be that big across just 1 year, but we do baseline and then end line for that year, or an end line for the 18 months. And so we do see traction, such as the Bali project for the rice paddies. Just after 4 cycles, the increase had been 2.05 up to 2.58%. So as long as you see the traction, then you know that the farmers are actually following the instructions in terms of what practices they should, or how they should implement those practices. So yeah, those are kind of some of the measurements.
Yeah, and in terms of, like, because you've got a different audience to everybody else. You've got the consumer in the mix as well. So what information do you provide back to them? I mean, there's I guess the verification of exactly what you've just described there in terms of what the farm's doing. But, you know, is there an information flow back to the customer in terms of the impacts and things? It's just interesting to think about what those sort of hooks are for that sort of, like you mentioned very rightly that diet change is very difficult to do. Most governments run away from making those sorts of decisions. So sort of, you know, how I'm curious, I guess, about what sort of information is fed back then. Yeah,
and I would say, instead of dictating all the data, because people do lose attention spans, we focus a lot on storytelling. So creating stories out of these projects and what the farmers' testimonials are, So we create videos and posts on Instagram, and use LinkedIn and write up blogs and do interviews, podcasts. So all these different ways of actually interacting with our consumer, with the diners, as well as the restaurants themselves. Tagging them, getting them involved, knowing that they are actually participating in those changes as well. That is how we actually tell the story of what's happening to their dollars. To be honest, most of these funds are coming in very nominal amounts, right? Each diner going in to pay for $100 bill is just $1 additional. So a lot of consumers are interested in what we do, and they have no issues in contributing. But it's an extra if we allow that information to be transparent. We provide all of the communications and a QR code for the restaurants to put it on like a table tent card or their menu, so that the diners can actually access the information directly. They're so happy to contribute, to be very frank.
No, that's great. It's brilliant to hear. So it's that sort of impact that you're having as well. I'll just talk to the audience, because there's been I can ask millions of questions, but I'd rather the audience ask them. So we've got probably about sort of another just under 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you've got some more questions, do type them in. I'm hoping that the app is refreshing, so I haven't had any new ones in for a while, but I'll continue with the data question or side of things. So if anyone wants to come in, and John, have you got any?
Yeah, well, Jack, can I build on, because Peggy has used the word transparency, and I couldn't agree more with what Peggy has said. Okay, there is an inherent resistance out there towards nature-based solutions for carbon removals. It's because certainly offsets has now become, to a large extent, a dirty concept. And so society, and particularly policymakers and legislators and concerned citizens, are very weary. And along comes the land-based sector and say, well, we can do this, 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 and this. And say, well, we've heard all this before. And the only extra word I would like to put alongside Peggy's, or Peggy's word of transparency, is integrity. And I think we have to get over a hump where in the land-based sector, we have to go beyond anything. We have to go beyond where mitigation of greenhouse gases are, to prove our credibility, because there is a reputational issue already out there. And at the heart of the journey we've been on is this issue about integrity and transparency, measuring, reporting, and verifying, not just to pick up the behavioral change, but to pick up the consequence of the behavioral change. And when you go to measure the consequence of behavioral change, that means you have to lift your game that bar higher, okay? And that's where this becomes really expensive. And I think one of the conversations and debates I would like to have globally and locally with policymakers is that we are asking a new industry called measuring, reporting, and verification to start from nowhere, okay, to measure our public good. And largely the public sector abdicate their responsibility because there's market failure. What's in it for a lot of people in the private sector to invest in measuring, reporting, and verification? And I think we do need to go beyond the pale. We do need to go further to prove that land-based sectors, nature-based solutions can actually, deliver this. I had the pleasure last year, I traveled to Indonesia. I went to see the complex rice systems in Indonesia, and I was blown away with what I saw out there. Most of the work, or part of the work in Indonesia, is a fellow member of the global network of lighthouse farms that I'm a member of, ArcZero is a member of, for Wageningen University and Research. And what we saw out there is the delight of the complex rice systems is they delivered multiple public goods. Now, one good on its own may not be good as a silver bullet, but the fact that they're delivering on 5 or 6 public goods simultaneously is the bit that they were struggling to get their message over. As a biologist, as an ecologist, as a land manager, I loved what they were doing. The difficulty they had is they were failing in the communication because it's a complex rights system. And that really has got me thinking about how do we in the land-based sector communicate complexity? I will argue complexity is our friend, not our enemy when it comes to actually delivering solutions, but it's absolutely our enemy in communication. And we've got this dichotomy of measuring up complexity being the right solution for nature-based solutions. But somehow or other, we have to crack this communication, because at the moment we're losing this battle, is everyone still wants the silver bullets. And nature-based solutions, the role of soil, there is no silver bullet. It is this extraordinary multifunctional asset that only doesn't just produce food, it regulates water, it does all the other things that it does. And somehow we need to get smart. And that's why I think measurement is really important, the data around that. And then the independent verification that we are actually, and that brings you the integrity, we are actually doing what we're saying we're doing. And I think that's really important.
No, thanks, John, for those. Does anyone want to come in? I don't want to kind of, Rana.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that discussion. Yeah. It's really interesting to see how the data and communication can actually work together to create a proper solution. Because in our recent work where we develop the digital tools with farmers, we've been visiting quite a lot of farmers trying to know like how the knowledge gap on their side, and we see that even like they don't know how to translate their data. They don't know how many production or yield that they have within a year, which is really concerning. And they don't know like how their soil conditions, how much nutrient they should add back to the soil. So they don't understand really like why they should put like organic matter to the soil, why they need to care about the carbon there, even like applying biochar and also like creating complexity to, for example, having the biochar on their field and adding more like organic matter. That's why when we try to make these tools called oil palm assistant, we try to integrate the site-specific data based on their field. Like it's kind of like a farmer's diary to make it easy, like user-friendly. We ask them like to put their yield records because most of the farmers don't know how much they produce, and also giving like some agronomic practices solution based on their field, but they need to input some of the data, like for example, to count the fruits and also to check how many fertilizer based on the production and so on. And on the chat OPA, the generative AI chatbot, it's kind of like the ChatGPT, the one that we all know. So the farmer can ask anything about their field, like how to manage their land and how many, for example, empty fruit bunch they should add to the field, and also asking like what's going on with my soil when there is like a prolonged dry or prolonged drought happens like in 3 months and so on. So I think we try to make the science easy to understand through this app, but still we face the challenge because most of the smallholders that we found, it's more likely above like 40 years old and have like limited education. So we need to be patient to explain how to use the technology to them. And I think it's the homework for us like scientists and researchers to translate our work to be more easy to digest for the practitioners and actually the one who works on the field.
No, exactly. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, actually. It's that whole communication piece around, you know, actually taking that data and turning it into information that is useful for lots of different types of stakeholders. So someone managing the land, a policymaker, back to a scientist again. So yeah, that's really, really important point. So I'm afraid we don't have a time for any more questions, but I think it'll be nice just to think about if there's anything, maybe that is your reflection, Rana, but perhaps just if from each of the panelists then is just to kind of, you know, your key kind of message, I guess, at the end of the seminar. So something that you really want people to sort of take away. I'll go round. I'll start with John first, and then Dafydd, and then you, Rana, and welcome, Emma. We're just wrapping up, but if you're happy to provide a statement, I'm very happy to hear it. So yeah.
Thank you. I'll try my best.
No worries.
So do you want to go to Emma first?
Yes, John, sorry, yeah. John first.
Okay.
Just to kind of, as a wrap up.
From my point of view, the journey I've been on, quite simply, soil has to be put at the heart. It is an extraordinary multifunctional asset. Key in that is our ability to demonstrate that the soil is actually doing what we're saying it is doing, and to do that with integrity and transparency. And at that core, we don't have any other choice but to measure, report, and verify to a level that is actually beyond what we're doing for mitigation, to prove that nature-based solutions. I think at some stage we will win the right then to have our information believed in, but yeah. We need to do that to prove that soil is that multifunctional asset that is the future, not the problem.
Great, thanks, John. Dafydd, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of finish by touching upon something that's, you know, it's come up in our conversation, is that there isn't a silver bullet to achieving net zero with soils, but the soils are a central part of the solution. And I think it is key to recognise that there's not one size fits all approach, and we need to kind of take an all of the above strategy across the range of kind of management practices and interventions that we've discussed today, but that we need to kind of tailor them, working in partnership with farmers to make sure that they're achievable, practical, and economically feasible. And I think the final point is that with some of these approaches and some of the kind of more emerging technologies, maybe biochar, enhanced rock weathering, for example, we can't necessarily wait to deploy these until we've got all of the evidence. And actually there has to be an element of learning through doing. So sometimes, you know, if we've got evidence that we're not going to be doing harm, then that's maybe enough. And through ongoing monitoring, we can kind of track the impact of those management interventions. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, don't be scared to try new things, but monitor to ensure there's no unintended consequences. It's a good thing. We can't hang it exactly. We know, we talk about this context of the webinar in terms of COP, and actually, you know, taking action now, or in fact probably 20 or 30 years ago we should have started doing something. So yeah, it's an important point. Thanks, David. Rana?
Yeah, thank you. So as we already discussed the role of soil as the pathway of net zero, I think we all agree that building partnerships and also translate what we have from grassroots and working together hand in hand with the stakeholders, policymakers, and everyone that involved in the system is really the key point to change what we have right now, because our soil is degraded. We all know that, and we need to find that solutions that works in each of the regions that we have all around the world. So maybe if we have some of the research of technologies or whatever approach it is that works on different area, maybe we can try to break together and finding the solution for the other area that maybe lack of it. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And finally, I just want to bring Emma in, who is a carbon sequestration specialist. So she's a founder of Nirvana Carbon Solutions. So sorry we've thrown you in right at the end, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak and just to give some final words at the end of the seminar.
Thank you so much for including me, even for this brief component at the end. And I apologize for my colleague who were both based in the US, had a mistiming. But I just want to thank everyone for their contribution to the science and say that at Nirvana Carbon, our approach to nature-based solutions is scale and accessibility. We think that's what soil has to offer. You don't have billion-dollar upfront costs to get carbon sequestration going from the village level. It's incredible what we're all able to do when we come together. At our company, we operate in hundreds of villages simultaneously, empowering farmers to use their own land as a resource for change. And in Central Asia, we're working with government to work at the scale of hundreds of thousands of hectares to address intractable or seemingly intractable problems. So I guess our message is, one, soil can be an asset for tackling other environmental challenges. Throughout the process, we can additionally sequester carbon into the soil. So that's a tool for other environmental challenges as well, not just climate change. And two, that the asset for soil is the accessibility. Climate change is not going to be solved if we don't all take action. And soil is something that we all have beneath our feet. So it's an amazing place to start. I'm very excited to connect with anyone who's on this webinar and share more about our project. I know most of you got to do that at the beginning, but we work with biochar primarily. We also do afforestation and reforestation, so a variety of different methods, and exploring enhanced rock weathering too. So soil is boundless, and we're really excited to be both a research company and a company that works at the village level up. So thank you all for having me.
Great, and thanks for I'll put you on the spot there. So that was really nice summary from everybody actually. So we are at time. We're just a bit over now. Unfortunately, Peggy's had to move on to the next meeting. But on behalf of the British Society of Soil Science, I'd really like to express my gratitude for all of the speakers today, to Rana and John and Dafydd and Emma, and also Peggy. It was excellent kind of variety of different kind of case studies, but actually a lot of similarities between a lot of them as well. So that was really interesting to start to sort of unpick that as well. So a big thank you to all of you for your time, and obviously for the BS for their support in delivering the COP webinars as well, for organising the event. So thank you to the audience for attending. You'll find a quick feedback survey when you leave, so please do take time to complete that. It won't take very long. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you want to watch this again, it will be available on our YouTube channel very soon. And we just want to remind you of a couple of things that the Society is doing. We have that are upcoming. So we have our annual conference that is taking place in December in the UK, in Manchester this year. So there's still time to register. So please go to our website, www.soils.org.uk. And there's a great opportunity to hear about the latest developments in the research. We've had a little bit of a snapshot here today, but there's lots of experienced kind of presenters, not just on kind of net zero, but soils in the round, which is exactly what we've just been talking about actually. So yeah, hope to see you at our future events. Keep an eye on the website for our future webinars, and thanks for joining. Thanks again. Bye.